Gardevoir was one of the most successful decks at NAIC and still seems to be a top contender in this Worlds format. Today we're going to talk about how to play it. The first section we're going to talk about all the options for our deck list. The second section we're going to talk about prize mapping and the general goals that we're going to want to have for our turns. The third section we're going to talk about sequencing and more how to play the cards out of our hand each turn. And then the fourth section is just going to be tips for the most popular matchups. Alright, so these are the bare minimum cards that you need in any Gardy deck. You also need a fourth Ralts, but you could play a memory skip Ralts. I guess you could also consider the one that does 30 damage, but I don't think that is very good in this format right now. Also, I would play probably at least 2 more draw supporters or a Lumineon or Squawkabilly or something like that. I just figured 3 Iono and 3 Arbin are the bare minimum. Even though I think that there could be a possibility that Gardy could be played with no Arbin and just research an Iono. I have not really tried that yet though. We would also need to add either Town Store or get rid of the Evo engine and add back in Rare Candy if we were going to go the no Arbin route. One of the coolest parts about Gardy is the abundance of options that it has. There are a ton of attacking options, several support Pokemon, a few ace spec, and a ton of trainers that we could play. Let's start with the attackers. Flutter Mane and Screamtail should be included in every Gardy list, while Kirlia, Drifloon, and Mimikyu are some of the other most common options. Drifloon's Balloon Blast attack does 30 for each damage counter on it. Now combined with Munkidori, moving 30 damage from one of our other Pokemon, we can hit for 330 with it, or we could even just move 1 damage off our Drifloon to put it on odd damage counters to get it up to 110 damage doing 330. The main downside of Drifloon is that it can be knocked out with a Lost Vacuum if our opponent uses it on our Bravery Charm. So this is good into decks like Raging Bull and things where we really want to go fast and just trade big one-shots. Creselia's Moonglow reverse attack moves 2 damage counters from each of our Pokemon to one of our opponent's Pokemon. So this can be good in the mirror match to get around Manaphy. It's also much better against setup decks that have low HP basics to be knocked out, and it can also be used to set up damage on a higher HP Pokemon to be one-shot with things like our Gardevoir. Mimikyu is good against decks like Charizard, Miraidon, and Iron Hands decks. We can also use it against Regidrago to try and avoid them getting 2 prize turns, but they are able to gust around it and knock it out on the bench with a couple Dragapult attacks. We can put it on our bench to send up if our Drifloon's Bravery Charm gets vacuumed to try and avoid a 2 prize turn, and it can really put a stop to Miraidon just running through our deck with Iron Hands. We also have several support options like Tatsugiri, Greninja, and Mew, as well as Lumineon and Squawkabilly. Mew is not a very common inclusion in Gardy right now, but it is a good attacking option, and it also lets us get some extra draw with its ability restart, letting us draw up to 3. Radiant Greninja is one of the ones that I'm leaning towards right now. It lets us draw 2 cards for discarding an energy. It kind of lets us play around our Kirlias getting knocked out and makes it so that we always have a basic we can bench for some draw support. Tatsugiri is one that I'm not a huge fan of, but it did do well at NAIC. We can send it up into the active to try and find its supporter. It's very good to find a turn 1 Arvin or maybe even a late game Iono. But the downside is we do have to use Turo to get it out of the active or manually attach an energy from our hand to retreat it. And those manual attachments could be used on Munkidori, where I feel they would be much better. Lumineon and Squawkabilly are also options, but I kind of stay away from those because bench space is already so tight in the deck at the moment, which is why I've been trying to play it without Greninja as well lately. That's where Mew EX is pretty nice. It doubles as an attacker and a support Pokemon. This is Henry Chow's Gardy list from NAIC. Its main attacker is Flutter Mane and focuses more on setting up damage with Flutter Mane and Munkidori for Gardevoir EX knockouts or Screamtail. It also plays a luxurious cape, so at the end of the game we can hit for big damage with our Screamtail and take our last 2 prizes, or just make a bulky Mimikyu or Flutter Mane. It also plays the Hyper Aroma A-Spec instead of Unfair Stamp. This is better for going first and just allows us to set up, and the logic is if Gardevoir sets up, it usually wins. So I'm a big fan of Hyper Aroma in the deck right now. It also kind of cheats us a deck spot with only having to play one TM Evo. My favorite part of this deck list is the TM Devo. Setting up for TM Devo strategies with Flutter Mane and Munkidori is not only fun but pretty powerful as well. This is a Drifloon Unfair Stamp Gardy list. You'll notice it's also playing Klefki. Right now in Gardy we usually want to play two sort of ability lock Pokemon, and that's either two Flutter Mane or a Flutter Mane and a Klefki. Klefki is very good. It can shut off Ogerpon and Squawkabilly. It can completely shut down Lost Box, and decks cannot Iron Bundle around it. The downside being, if we bench this and don't get it out of play, our opponent can just boss it up and shut off our Manaphy and use things like Greninja to snipe our Kirlia or Kyurem to even take out 3 Kirlia. Now this list has to play 2 TM Evo because we have no Hyper Aroma. This list is also better at going second, and Unfair Stamp gives us a level of added disruption. This is the other common type of list from top 8, except I cut a card for a second Munkidori because I do believe that that is pretty good right now. Just having the option of 2 Munkidoris is extremely strong, and you can attack with your Gardy X with no damage and hit for 250 with it. Moving 60 damage each turn is kind of insane, and I think most decks will be playing 2 monkeys going forward. This is where I am at with my Gardy list right now. I've basically taken the Henry Chow style of list and added a Drifloon and a Bravery Charm. I am looking to take the Drifloon out. Just right now I think it might be necessary, and I'm doing further testing to find out if that is the case. I also added a PAL pad to have the option of a second Boss's Order or extra Iono or even extra Turo. This is also a very cuttable card. With no Greninja, I have only opted to play 1 Nest Ball and 2 Artisan. There hasn't been the most amount of stadiums in the format lately, so Artisan tends to stick from what I've noticed. So that will find us all of our attacking options. But Drifloon, Bravery Charm, and PAL Pad are probably the most cuttable cards. I will be at some point trying to cut these cards and add something like a second Vessel, a Mew EX, and maybe a Greninja, or just a second Boss's Order. But since I haven't tested that yet, I don't really want to speak too much on it. This is the list I have been testing, and it seems to be doing pretty good for me so far. Prize mapping is figuring out what Pokemon we're going to knock out and how we're going to do it. It's pretty important in Gardevoir to know how to manage your resources and what Pokemon to move Munkidori damage onto and to put damage on with Flutter Mane, and it can definitely be one of the more challenging parts of playing this deck. This is one of the reasons Drifloon can be so nice in the deck. Just having an option to one-shot anything can make prize mapping much easier. Now there are 2 general routes that we want to go with Gardy, the aggro route or the disruptive route. More often than not, we're going to have to go for the disruptive route because Gardy is such a slow deck. But against decks like Raging Bull or just any deck with a lot of 2-prizers where we get set up fast enough, going the aggro route never hurts. Typically, we want to go for this when we can start taking one-shots when our opponent is at 4 prize cards, because if they go down to 3 prize cards, they can win before us by taking our EX out, but we can Turo it out of play to avoid that from happening and set up more checkmate situations. And sometimes if they're only at 4 prizes and we have like a big Drifloon setup, they really shouldn't go for the EX, because then we just get to attack them again and we don't have to put our EX back in play. And not putting the EX in play when we don't have to, or Turoing it up, is a really good way for this deck to get back into the prize trade. That's why I'm still playing 2 Turo at the moment. And the prize trade is just basically how fast we're going to take our prize cards versus how fast our opponent is going to take theirs. And to figure this out, you just kind of imagine how many turns it's going to take you to win, and then figure out what your opponent can do to win the quickest. And if their route is faster than our route, we either need to get the EX out of play to avoid them from winning, or go for the more disruptive route. We do want to recognize this pretty early in the game so that we can start focusing down our opponent's support Pokemon or the basics of their support Pokemon, and really start picking at their engine to set up for something like a late game Iono plus counter catcher and use Scream Tail, or just counter catcher, knock out their other way to find cards, or the only attacker that they have set up. Gardy can really capitalize on identifying the weaknesses of a deck or someone's setup and then exploiting them, so it's always something to keep a lookout for. We need to have a pretty good knowledge of the meta and what is most commonly in each deck to be able to fully exploit our opponent's weaknesses. Like say if Charizard is somehow down both super odds, all of its energy, PAL Pad, Turo, then we can Iono, counter catcher up their Rotom and start taking knockouts with our Scream Tail. If we're certain that they're out of everything, we can even start two-shotting things on the bench. And if we have no other options and we're gonna lose if we don't, even if our opponent is down most of their ways to retreat or get out of the active, we can still try this play. And if we've already knocked out their Pidgeot and their Pheasantipity or Barrel, there is a low chance they'll be able to draw out of it, and we should be able to take back the prize trade before they can find a way to start attacking again. This is a very common play, so we often want to be careful about going ahead in the prize trade, and usually staying behind by just one prize is pretty perfect to keep counter catchers active, and when our opponent goes down to one prize, we can take our final two, so we'll still be able to win the prize trade. This is the main reason that Gardy doesn't really need rare candy right now, because we often want to go behind a little bit anyways, so a slow setup is just fine. Another thing to take note of is situations do pop up where we can't get a big attack quick enough, and if our opponent has something like a Squawkabilly on the bench and we're able to get Scream Tail, we should just knock that out, especially if we know that they're able to Turo the Squawk out of play or collapse it out of play. And sometimes we just need to take two prizes to have a chance at winning the game. Like when our opponent is at 3 prizes and we just need to take 2 that turn to be able to go 2-2-2 before they can knock out our final 3 one prize Pokemon. Something I see people mess up with often is knowing which Pokemon to send up per turn. This may sound like something pretty minimal, but it can be pretty important with Gardy. Like, often we want to just send up our EX because it is a 2 retreat cost, therefore we can put 40 damage on it so that we have the full 30 to move with Munkidori. Or sometimes we just need to send up something that we have energy on from an earlier attachment or a Cresselia play, just to retreat them off, because we really don't want to get in the position where our energies are stuck on board and we're not able to take a big one shot to finish the game with our Scream Tail or Drifloon. One of the most common complaints with Gardevoir is that it's a very slow deck, so it's hard to win 2 out of 3 games. Now, I'm a pretty slow player and I haven't really had that problem when playing Gardy at best of 3 tournaments or the one major that I've played it at. I only tied a couple times, but some things that we definitely want to take note of is if you're playing game 1 and you still have a good amount of time left and you think that there's like less than a 40% chance that you're going to win that game, scooping is probably a very good option. I'll only stick around in a game that's going very poorly if I think I'm playing against a pretty inexperienced player, or I think that my odds of winning that game are higher than the odds of finishing 2 more games or having my opponent scoop a game that they're losing quickly. But either way, when playing Gardy, that is something that you have to be comfortable with, that sometimes you might have to scoop a game that you don't feel you're fully out of. Also, I would discourage people from trying to play game 2 as slow as possible to try and basically win a best of 1, unless there's like a really small amount of time left. If there's like only 10 minutes left, then yeah, sure. But when I first started playing the game about 6 years ago, and I was like kind of uncomfortable with best of 3 situations, I tried to do that for a little bit, where I would basically think that the second game would never finish, and this almost always led to me tying, so I would definitely discourage that. And one main thing that I think a lot of people have forgotten lately is that we're playing this game to have fun, and slow rolling your opponent or playing as slow as possible just to win a round isn't really fun for anyone involved. Sequencing is playing cards in a certain order to make it most likely that we achieve a desired outcome. Now, Gardy used to be a lot more heavy in correct sequencing when level ball was a card and things like that. I think it is much more simpler now, but the harder part has now become knowing what to refinement away or trade. I'll probably just call refinement trade because it's just easier to say. Now, here's one example that I see people often do wrong, and it is just a simple first turn sequencing mistake, and it involves a hand that looks like this. Now, I often see people just slam the Artisan down, play it, and then play Iono. But what we really want to do is put the Artisan in play and then play Iono, because we want to leave more Ralts or more of the Pokemon that we're looking to find in our deck, because it gives us higher odds to just draw them off of the Iono. Now, I know you're saying, oh, but I don't want to draw Ralts, I want to draw Buddy Poffin. But really the goal of turn 1 in a Gardy deck is just to find Ralts, so anything to increase the odds that you find any more Ralts is generally going to be the best way to go. This is another hand that I often see played wrong. People will often just slam the Arven down first, but I think the best way to go would be to play down the Artisan and use it first and make sure the cards that we're looking for are in the deck, which in this situation would be Earthen Vessel and TM Evo. And specifically the Artisan is the best way to go first because say our other 2 Ralts are prized, we can only get 1. We probably don't really want to waste the nest ball, but the main reason that Artisan is correct to play first because if the Vessel and TM Evo aren't in the deck, we probably don't even want to play the Arven that this turn. We just want to get down our 3 Ralts and hold Arven for next turn to get Hyper Aroma, or in the Unfair Stamp version, we could grab Unfair Stamp or an Ultra Ball to get Kirlia, because other than that, the hand is pretty dead. And if we were to Arven first and realize that and grab the Hyper Aroma, then our opponent would be more likely to Iono us, and the Iono would hit even harder because it would put our Hyper Aroma to the bottom of the deck, and that would be one of the cards we're looking to draw off of the Iono. So the next thing would be knowing what order to use the trade ability or play a supporter or whatever. So at the beginning of the turn, we're going to want to decide what we're trying to do for each turn. This is important because knowing what supporter we're going to play will let us know what order to use our Kirlia's abilities and so on. Like if we're looking for another supporter, obviously we would use all of our trades before using a supporter like Arven. If we're looking for Counter Catcher plus Super Rod, we would use the trades until we draw into one of them and then Arven for the other one, and then use the other refinements to draw different cards that we would want. And then if we're looking for any non-item card, use Arven first and then use all of our trade abilities. And then if we're looking to play Iono and it's already in our hand, we want to play that first, because ideally we would be adding to our new hand instead of just adding cards to the hand we're going to shuffle to the bottom. The only way that I do it in a different order is if there's something like that I really want to get in the discard pile, like an energy or just a super dead card. But other than that, we should trade after Iono. Knowing when to use Counter Catcher versus Boss can also be another tricky decision. There are definitely some things to think about when making that decision, like will Counter Catcher still be playable? Will my opponent be able to play around the Counter Catcher? Like in these situations, we would want to use up the Counter Catcher while we can. And another thing to think about that would lead us to use Boss is if this is the last turn that we're not looking to play Iono, because the strongest thing about Counter Catcher is the ability to gust and play a different supporter in the same turn. Overall, item gust is more powerful. So if we know that Counter Catcher is going to be live for the rest of the game, then we would want to use the supporter gust while we have the chance, because we can always find the Counter Catcher off of another supporter later in the game when we need it. And then there are the more general sequencing rules, like waiting more to the end of our turn to retreat unless we're evolving to a higher retreat cost Pokemon and we don't want to put more damage on it to retreat, and attaching our energy as late as possible. We shouldn't start our turn and just accelerate a bunch of energy with Gardy and then use Iono. We always want to do all that stuff at the end of the turn, just doing things in the order to leave ourselves the most options for the longest amount of time. Don't be afraid to use your super rods. I think I fall into this trap sometimes where I end up saving my super rods till the end of the game, but Sometimes you just have to use the super rods when you have them in your hand before they get put to the bottom of the deck or something like that. I think the hardest part about playing Gardevoir right now is knowing what to trade away with Kirlia. It used to be pretty easy when we had access to Level Ball. We could thin our deck and just get rid of useless Pokemon and stuff in our deck. But now, with only the Kirlias and 2 Ultra Balls as options to thin, it is a little bit harder to thin, and all the cards seem a little more valuable. So there has become kind of a fine line between thinning and just throwing away resources. Like sometimes just trading away Buddy Poffins is good, but if we play Drifloon, Buddy Poffins become a way to find Drifloon, and we don't want to get rid of our last way, or our last item-based way to find one of our attackers, because finding it off of Arven is always a good option. I would also say be careful getting rid of too many supporters, with the deck not playing PAL pad now, and a lot of decks seem to be able to get rid of our Kirlias. Getting rid of too many supporters will lead to the more likely chance of bricking off of an Iono, and supporters can often just seem like the best thing to trade away out of a hand, but it's definitely something to think about. Like Pokemon are often a good choice because we always have the super rod to recover them, and energies, obviously in a perfect world all that we trade away is energies and our extra, Poffins and Pokemon that we don't need. One thing to take note of before trading away an attacker is how many times that we want to attack with it in that game. Like any one of attacker with the 2 super rod can only be used 3 times, so if we want to use it 3 times, then we can't trade away any attackers or super rods. Alright, now on to the matchups. Now one thing about Gardy is it doesn't really have the most amount of favored matchups, but the deck can win against almost any matchup, so that is going to be the reason to play it. It has good onboard draw, it attacks with 1 prize Pokemon, things like that are all bonuses and things that we want to take advantage of with the deck. Alright, Charizard. Charizard has been kind of unfavored this past format with the deck for most lists, but with the TM Devo build, it has become pretty favored, I would say, especially if our opponent tries to do a play like rare candying into Dusknoir and Charizard and Pidgeot all in the same turn. Sometimes just Iono and TM Devo will win the game on the spot, because finding their last rare candy can be pretty hard without access to Pidgeot and with a low hand size. Another play to keep in mind with the TM Devo is there is that Charmeleon that has the ability that it can't be like affected by effects, so TM Devo doesn't work on it. But if we counter catcher it up with a Flutter Mane in the active, TM Devo will work on it because it does shut off the ability. The way that I have been playing this matchup lately is I'll just attack with Flutter Mane as much as possible and try and set up enough damage on my opponent's Charmanders and Pidgeys to TM Devo and knock them all out at once, and then you basically just win the game because your opponent can't attack anymore. Also, the 50 HP Pidgeys can be knocked out with a combination of Munkidori and the 2 Flutter Mane damage counters. Another thing we're going to want to focus in this deck is if they do get out Pidgeot, we do want to try and knock that out as quick as possible to set up for late game Iono plays. If we play Mimikyu in the deck, it is a good thing to bench when attacking with Drifloon, because if they lost Vacuum, our Burby Charm, and knock out our Drifloon, we can just send up Mimikyu, and then they have to find either a boss or a 1 prize attacker to knock out our Mimikyu. Another thing is we also need Manaphy in this matchup now, which is something that I've forgotten about in this format, because Pheasantipity does snipe the bench for 100 for 3 colorless, so they can knock out our Kirlias with it. This is also a matchup where we're going to want to Turo up our Gardy EX when possible, because they can knock it out very easily. But there are situations where we already have 10 damage counters on a Drifloon, and we have damage in play for Munkidori to take advantage of. So if they do knock out our EX, we can just knock them out with another Drifloon and not put it back in play, so that they can't just take 4 prizes over 2 turns. Lugia is also apparently popular this format, which I did not really expect. I kind of thought there was going to be a downtrend of it, but after winning that Japanese Worlds Preparation Tournament, it has definitely seen an increase in play. With Lugia, we're going to want to put Enhanced Hammer and a Sinnoh, if possibly, back in our Gardy list. Now, the Enhanced Hammer is very good for when they attack with Iron Hands. We can hammer off the Legacy energy and start Scream Tailing the Archeops or whatever is on the bench. And if we can't find our Enhanced Hammer or our Sinnoh, we can also move 3 damage counters onto the Iron Hands with Munkidori, attack it with Gardy, and then put another damage on it next turn to knock it out. This gets around the Legacy energy and the Gift energy. So Munkidori is definitely good for getting around Gift energies. Often we want to put the Munkidori damage onto a Lugia that is on the bench to set it up to take our final 2 prizes with Gardevoir EX. And we can also knock out Mincinos with it, combined with Flutter Mane or just enough Munkidori pings. We definitely want to be thinking about ways to take extra prize cards with our Munkidori damage throughout the game. Also, if we Screamtail all of the Archeops or both of the Archeops, then we can start attacking with our EX, and they shouldn't have a good way to one-shot it. Keep it a count on how many energy that they have left. They often play like 16 or 17 energy, and if we're counter-catching and like Screamtail sniping, there's a chance that they run out, especially if they try and set up 2 Iron Hands. So if they're down 17 energies, we can always just win by gusting something up with no energy and Screamtailing for the rest of the game. Just be careful of Roseanne's backup. I haven't seen it in too many of the lists lately, but just know that that is always a good option for the deck to play. The Gardevoir Mirror. The main thing we're going to want to do in this matchup is KO Kirlia, whether that be with Screamtail, Munkidori plus Flutter Mane, or Cresselia. If we're using Cresselia, we definitely want to be careful about spreading energy too thin. This can happen a lot quicker than one would think. If playing the Devo, it's always something to look out for. If we can get like 90 damage on the EX and all they have is Kirlias in play, other than that, a TM Devo could possibly buy a turn with them not attacking, as long as they don't have any other attackers set up, or if we're able to knock out their attacker with Munkidori. Generally, being 1 prize behind in this matchup is very good, because we're going to be trying to set up a 2 prize turn with either Flutter Mane or just knocking out the Gardy EX. But if we do go ahead early in the game, we have to be pretty careful with our boss's orders, because that will be our only way to gust. Another cute play that we can do is bring up the Gardevoir EX and attack it with Flutter Mane, and if they are not able to get out another EX, they won't be able to accelerate energy with it because the Flutter Mane shuts off the Gardy's ability. This also works against things like Baxcalibur, and we can also do this a similar play with Bibarel by bringing it up, Ionoing, and then they can't draw with Bibarel, and we put 90 damage on it, which sets up perfectly to knock it out the next turn with Munkidori. We are always going to want to be looking out for plays like this that will buy us back an extra turn. Snorlax is a pretty difficult matchup with this deck, even with the 2 Turo. We're going to want to set up our board kind of like this so that we can use Ralts to switch back to the bench and just retreat the Flutter Mane because it shuts off the Snorlax's ability. Something to watch out for is the handheld fans. Without those, this matchup would probably be pretty favored, but they're going to move all the energy off our Pokemon until we can't accelerate anymore to retreat them or to use the attack. Now, Turo is going to be most important in this matchup. We want to use it in situations where we can get the most energy, or sometimes we are forced to use it if we have 60 damage on a Ralts and we can no longer accelerate to it. Now, Raging Bolt seems like it can definitely be a free matchup, but it can spiral out of control pretty quickly. They go very fast, and just stumbling for an extra turn or two can mean that we can't win. If we're not playing Drifloon, it's going to be really hard to knock out the Raging Bolts, and they also generally play 1 Lost Vacuum, so we have to be careful of that. So we are going to want to focus down things like knocking out their Squawkabilly with our Screamtail, and use Munkidori to knock out their Ogerpons with either a Drifloon without a Bravery Charm, or even our Gardy EX if it works out in the prize trade. And then we can use a big Drifloon or a Gardy with a couple Munkidori pings to take our last 2 prizes. We can also use Mimikyu to set up damage for later knockouts, and even buy a turn with Mimikyu and an Iono combo. It is going to be much harder to win the game just off of the back of Iono or Mimikyu now though, because they are going to be playing rescue stretchers to recycle their Sandy Shocks. And one thing to always remember is that Ogerpon is protected from bench snipe damage. I've forgotten that before, and I've definitely seen plenty of other people forget it as well. Regidrago is supposedly going to be one of the more popular decks this format. Somehow I have not run into many of them online, so I only have what I imagine would be the best way to play the matchup in my head. We're going to want to identify if they are playing Raging Bolt or not, because if they're playing Giratina V-Star and we can get down to Munkidori, attacking with the EX will be a very good option. Using it to hit and then Turoing it up after they hit us and attacking with a fresh one a couple times should be able to get us ahead in the prize trade. We could also just try and prize race them by like sniping their Squawkabilly or their Mew off the bench and then knocking out an Ogerpon and then one-shotting a Drago at the end. We can also try and knock out their Pheasantipity and their Mew EX so that a late game Iono will be able to stick them a little bit harder, and then hopefully we can take the prize trade back at that point. Mimikyu can be good for setting up knockouts because they aren't playing a shred attacker. The downside is they can boss something up and damage it with Dragapult when it's on the bench. If they cure him at the wrong time, Gardy can often just win the matchup because it is going to be very hard for them to set up another Regidrago if they don't already have a backup one and they already use their V-Star. Or even sometimes it'll be hard for them to move the one in the active to the bench. So if we can like snipe the bench one a couple times to knock it out and then leave them with just a couple Ogerpons and the active Regidrago with no energy on it, that should be a good way to win. We also want to go first in this matchup for sure and try and set up our bench accordingly. But if they get a fast enough start and play the matchup right, it is going to be pretty hard. Like if they're able to go first, get a turn 2 Dragapult plus Hawlucha, take 2 prizes, then they could get into a situation where they only need 2 more attacks to win the game because they just knock something out and then cure them 3 things. So maybe we can manipulate our bench in such a way that we don't have many low HP Pokemon on it, like by evolving 2 Gardy EXs and just leaving like 1 Kirlia on the bench, or even relying on Greninja if we're playing it at that point. And Mimikyu can't be sniped off the bench by Kyurem with Regidrago attacking it. So the main things we're going to want to try and take advantage of is their big retreat cost, and if they are not able to one-shot a Gardevoir EX. Alright, so hopefully this was helpful. This was a pretty hard video to make. This is like the 3rd or 4th time that I've made it. There's just so much to consider with Gardy, and without just like going through 50 games and explaining every single decision and every single line, it's kind of hard to get everything. So I tried to compile some of the stuff that I've most often seen people do wrong, or just things that I think would be generally useful to help someone start playing this deck or play this deck a little bit better. Yeah, so like or dislike, comment, subscribe if you can. Getting close to 500, and 500 and 1,000 are when you're finally able to get monetized, and being monetized would be pretty sweet. But yeah, I hope this was helpful and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Take care and have a good one.